Hey everyone, in this video we're going to do another short Latin story. Now this one is called The Story of Atys, and I'm calling it part one because even though these are short Latin stories, this is actually one of the longer ones you'll find in this work. And it comes from the Easy Latin Stories for Beginners textbook from George L. Bennett. So again, like you always hear me say whenever I use stories from Bennett, what he's calling Easy Latin Stories for Beginners, I don't necessarily think are easy, and they're not also necessarily for beginners. So I always say that I would peg these if you're a student probably around like Latin 2 or 3, somewhere in that range, depending on the sort of grammar track that you follow. Same if you're a teacher, I would say probably in that intermediate range is best. The beginning stories in this book are more suited for that level. As you go on, they introduce things like subjunctive and kind of harder grammar that might be a little bit trickier for students who haven't had a couple of years of Latin to understand. But they're a great resource because Bennett mixes in a lot of myths and a little bit of history. Some of the stories have sort of a moral value to them. So it's a nice variety. And it's a great way to break free of sort of a traditional Latin textbook. So if you're a student and you just want to learn more, use these. They're really fun. I'm going to help you with your Latin. And again, it just kind of breaks you free from having to read the same thing kind of over and over again in your textbook. Now, before we dive in, the first thing I'll do is I'll read this story to you. Again, not that my pronunciation is anything fantastic, but it's always perfect, or a good way rather, to hear the story aloud, right? So if you can find a student or a classmate, that would be perfect because you can have them read it to you, you read it to them, and that way you're hearing, you're speaking, you're listening, all those skills together. It's a really great way to kind of work on your Latin. You always want to bring the language to life and not just read it sort of in your head, okay? The other thing I would recommend, if you really want to dive into the story and use it as sort of a checkpoint to make sure you can read the Latin, do a pre-read and get the vocab. These stories are so old, I would highly doubt you'd probably find a vocab list. It might exist. I'm not actually sure. But it's pretty easy to make your own too. Just pre-read the story, look through it. Any words you're not sure of, look them up. Bennett does use some sort of older forms at times, but you could still find it with any of the online tools that we have, just to be able to figure out what the words mean. The other thing you might want to do is try the read and reread method. So if you're really trying to translate the story well, again, I always say read through the story once, write down any problem areas you have, and then when you're done, try to fix those problem areas and keep repeating that process. And eventually your list of problems should get shorter and shorter until you're able to read the story all the way through from start to finish and understand most, if not all of it. That's how you know you're in a really good place, okay? So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video, go work on it. Otherwise, I'll read it to you now, and then we'll dive in, okay? So the first part we're going to do goes like this. You have Croiso, Lydiae regi, filius erat nomine Atys. Hunc Chrysos insomnio vidit, ferea cuspide trajectum et crurore conspersam. Expergefactos illi, domi filium retinet, dende jacula et hastas obdit in arca. Interim sardes vir advenit obstrictus scelere. Eum Chrysos expiavit, et benigne accepit. Tum eum percontator his verbis. Quis est? Quem virum occidisti? Respondet hospes talia. O rex gordiae sum filius, est autem mihi nomen adrasto. Fratrem meum invitus occidi, ad sum a patre ejectus rebus omnibus destitutus. Tum Chrysos inquit, ex viris amicis oriundus es, et ad amicos venisti. Ita ille in Chrysi aedibus vitam ageba. Okay, so we'll pause the video there. Again, just so you can hear it one time. Not that my speaking is anything great, but again, just so you can hear it in case you don't have anyone to read it to you. And again, if you need to go do that work we mentioned, go back and do it. But otherwise, let's just take it a line at a time and see what this first part is all about. Okay? So it starts with this. You have there was to to Croesus. So Chryso there is dative. So you're saying there was to him a Filius, a son, right? So you could almost say like there was to Croesus, king of Lydia, right? Lydiae regi, they're all dative going with, or Lydia, rather, it's all talking about Croesus. So there was to Croesus, the king of Lydia, a son named Atys, right? This is his famous son. Croesus saw him in a dream, right? Hunc Croesus insomnio vidit. So he saw him in a dream, having been pierced, triectum, by an iron weapon, a ferea cuspide, right? So this iron weapon had struck him and kind of, injured or wounded his son. And he was sprinkled with blood, crurore conspersam, right? So his son is kind of lying there dying in this dream, okay? Then you have experge factus ille. So you're saying, having awakened, right, he keeps his son at home, right? So ille retinit domicilium. So he keeps his son at home after he sees this dream. He's like, no, I don't want this to happen to my son. So if he stays near me, he won't die. Okay, and we all know when you go through sort of Greek mythology and the stories that come from it, and stories about the oracles, you can't outrun your fate. That's sort of one of the key things of Greek culture is if you are fated to have something happen to you, it's going to happen. Okay, but he tries to kind of hide from it anyway. So he keeps his son at home, and then he hides the javelins and the spear, so the yakula et hastas, right? So anything like a sharp iron object, right? He hides them in arca, in a chest. So he hides all the weapons. So he's thinking to himself, if there are no metal weapons, iron weapons, and my son is always at home, he can't get stabbed, right? Kind of a good plan, but that's what he goes with. Okay. Then you have interim. So meanwhile, a man arrived in Sardis, right? Sardes vir advenit. So he arrived in Sardis, having been involved with a crime, obstrictus scelere, right? So he did something criminal. Okay. Then you have Croesus purified him. So Croesus expiavit eum, right? He kind of cleansed him or forgave him, purified, some version of that. And he benigne accepit, he welcomed him kindly. So he brings this man in. Okay. Then he asked him questions, right? Tum eum per contato, right? He asked him questions with these words, his verbis. And notice here that the question he asks is, quis est, who are you, right? And then he says, what man did you kill, right? Occidisti quem virum. So he does the questioning after he's already taken the man in and forgiven him. And that's the idea of xenia, right? Which we've spoken about before in different videos, but this Greek hospitality, right? This idea of Mediterranean hospitality. You would bring someone in, take care of them without really knowing who they are. That's the point. So he forgives him. This man comes in, he welcomes him. He says, you're fine. And then he asks them, hey, by the way, who are you and who did you kill? It's kind of funny. So I think that for a lot of my students, they think that's weird that you would, kind of forgive the criminal and then be like, by the way, what happened? But that's really what it's getting at here, right? That idea of xenia. So he says, who are you and who did you kill? Then you have the hospes talia responded. So the stranger responds as such. And remember, hospes there can mean guest. It could also mean stranger, which is probably a better way of doing it here. So he responded as such. And he says, O king, right? O rex. He says, Gordiae sum filius. I am the son of Gordius. Est autem mihi nomen Adrastos. So he says, moreover, my name is Adrastus, right? The name for me is Adrastus. Then he says, fratra meum invitus occidis. So I killed my brother. Invitus here is usually translated unwillingly. It probably means like by accident is a better way to do it here, right? I killed my brother by accident. I didn't mean to, right? So he says, ad sum apatre ejectus. I'm here having been expelled by my father, right? Apatre. So his father kicked him out. And then he says, not only that, he's destitutus rebus omnibus. So kind of devoid, right? Destitute of all things. So he's poor. He's been kicked out. He has nowhere to go. And he ends up at the court of King Croesus. Okay. Then you have the last one, you have tum Croesus inquit. So then Croesus said, and he says, ex viris amicis oriundos est. So you are descended from friends. So he recognizes the name. He says, you're descended from friends, and et ad amicos venisti, and you've come to friends, right? You came to friends. So he's saying, you're kind of one of us is the idea, right? Don't worry, you're among friends. He's like, I'm going to take care of you. Then you have ita ille in Croesi aedibus vitam ageba. So thus he spent his life in the house of Croesus, right? In the sort of court of King Croesus. So this is part one. Again, it goes on from here. But the beginning of the story is this dream that Croesus has, right? This prophecy that his son is going to be killed. He hides all the weapons, and then down the line, years later, this random stranger comes in. You can already kind of see where this is going, right? It's never good when you have a prophecy of your child being killed and then a stranger shows up who's been murdering people. But you can kind of get a sense of it. But we'll pick that up in a different video. I broke it into 3 parts, right? Because it is a little bit longer. But this first part kind of gets the narrative going and gives you a chance to work on your Latin. So again, it's something different. I know we're at sort of a cliffhanger here. We don't know the whole story, but at least it's a chance to break free from a textbook. Like I said, read something different and really work on your Latin. So if you have any questions at all, anything bothering you, put it in the comments below. I'm always happy to help. Otherwise, keep practicing it and try to hit a point where you can read this on your own and you understand it. That's how you know you're in a good spot. Good luck.